Ich freue mich sehr, dass Sebastian Schindler da ist. Am I taken rightly that you're doing this in English? Oder antwortest du auf Deutsch?
Ich kann den Kommentar noch auf Deutsch machen, Holger. Und dann können wir den Clip und Englisch wechseln mit Endre gemeinsam.
Okay, dann ist das jetzt erstmal die Ankündigung, dass wir nach dem Kommentar zum Vortrag aufs Englische wechseln, damit Dr. Endre Dányi einfacher mitsprechen kann. Ich begrüße dann erst einmal Sebastian Schindler, genau, der gleich ein Mikrofon kriegt. Politikwissenschaftler, hat studiert Philosophie und Geschichte, zusätzlich noch, hat am Hessischen Zentrum für Friedens- und Konfliktforschung gearbeitet und interessiert sich und arbeitet vorzugsweise zu Theorien der internationalen Beziehungen, internationalen Organisationen, internationaler Politik. Ich glaube, ich übergebe einfach, oder lasse einfach ein Mikro übergeben.
Ja, ich habe die Aufgabe, noch ein paar Worte zu sagen. Wirklich nur ein paar Worte. Mal sehen, ob es gelingt angesichts der fortgeschrittenen Zeit. Wir haben ja so wenig Zeit bis heute 9:30 abends. Nur um diese Fragen zu diskutieren, ein paar Worte zu Holgers Vortrag. Erstmal auch Hallo in die Runde. Freue mich, hier zu sein und bedanke mich auch für die Einladung und bedanke vor allem auch Holger für die Einführung nicht nur in Hypernormalization, sondern auch in die Arbeit allgemeiner von Arendt und Curtis und dann den ganzen Bogen, den du geschlagen hast zu den heutigen Herausforderungen, zu Gesellschaftsanalyse, kritischer Gesellschaftsanalyse, die du anhand von Beispielen dann ausgeführt hast. Und ich habe eigentlich nur eine Rückfrage, die ich dir noch stellen wollte. Ich weiß gar nicht, ob eine Rückfrage überhaupt erlaubt war oder vorgesehen war. Gut, dann sehr gut. Die ist ganz einfach und kurz. Die ist nämlich die Frage, was ist diese Alternative dann, die wir brauchen? Und das ist ein bisschen fies, weil man dazu natürlich viel sagen könnte, aber vielleicht kommt ein bisschen was raus und ich will die noch ein bisschen einführen, eigentlich, warum ich diese Frage stelle, weil Endre und ich in dem nächsten Blog eher die kritischen Aspekte betonen werden, was diesen Film angeht. Eher auch darüber sprechen, was wir irgendwie etwas problematisch und beunruhigend finden an diesem Film. Also das war nämlich die Erfahrung, die ich hatte, als ich diesen Film gesehen habe, war ein Unbehagen, auch ein Ärger eigentlich, ein Ärger, den ich immer wieder geführt habe. Und wir zeigen da noch ein paar Clips, wäre auch sehr gespannt darüber, mit euch darüber zu reden, wie es Ihnen geht, wenn man bestimmte Clips dann auch dieses Films weiter schaut. Und das hängt genau damit zusammen, dieses Unbehagen, dieser Ärger, dass diese Kritik, die Curtis formuliert, die du sehr pointiert ja zusammengefasst hast. Die Kritik, dass das System uns ein falsches, unterkomplexes Bild der Welt vorsetzt. Dass wir dann diese Erfahrung der Hypernormalisation machen, diese Falschheit im Bewussten gar nicht erkennen, aber dass sie unbewusst irgendwie da ist. Ja? Also diese Diagnose, dass es diese einfache Geschichte der Welt gibt, die uns die Eliten vorsetzen, Finanzeliten, Politiker und die eigentlich die Komplexität, die Schwierigkeit der Welt versteckt. Ja? Dieses Argument, das diesen Film durchzieht, ein Problem und das, was das Unbehagen ausgelöst hat, bei mir beim Schauen dieses Films, war, dass Curtis dagegen setzt als Alternative. Es ist nicht seine Aufgabe, natürlich hier eine, wie du selbst gesagt hast, eine fundierte Gesellschaftskritik auszuarbeiten, sondern er will ein Problem aufzeigen, aber dass die Alternative, die er zeigt, die Geschichte, die er selbst erzählt, selbst genau das macht. Sie hat genau eine ganz einfache Geschichte über die Welt. Und die ist, dass das, was wir gesagt kriegen, falsch ist. Es ist alles nur Perception Management. Ja? Es ist alles nur Fake, was wir vorgesetzt kriegen. Die Welt wird immer als zu einfach dargestellt. Aber diese Geschichte selbst, die Curtis erzählt, ist ja genau das. Die wiederholt doch nur denselben Fehler. Die ist doch genau wieder nur ganz einfach. Dann können wir uns im Stuhl zurücklehnen und sagen, stimmt, genau, wir werden die ganze Zeit an der Nase herumgeführt. Aber der Weg zur Alternative wird dadurch nicht aufgezeigt. Und vielleicht ist das nicht das Problem, vielleicht muss er das nicht. Aber was ich schlimmer und beunruhigender fand, schlimmer ist ein starkes Wort, aber ich pointiere es jetzt auch, ist, dass es eigentlich nur uns in diesem Glauben nur bestärkt, die Falschheit selbst nur bestärkt. Wir lehnen uns wieder zurück und anstatt irgendwie zu suchen, genau weil die Welt so komplex ist, nach den Momenten, wo Sachen gelingen, wo auch kritisch aufgedeckt wurde, dass etwas falsch ist, wo nach diesen Perlen zu suchen, ja, erzählt der Film immer nur wieder die eine selbe Geschichte über Manipulation. Aber unser Ansatz mit Endre wird eher sein, dass es ihm eben genau nicht gelingt, da eine echte Alternative aufzumachen, sondern dass er selbst zum Symptom wird des Problems, das da besteht. Jetzt bin ich sehr gespannt, Holger.
Ja, ich muss mich ja auch kurz fassen. Also das ist ja eine Frage, mit der man einen Abend füllen könnte. Ja, ich finde es interessant. Ich verstehe, wie man den Film unterschiedlich wahrnehmen kann. Ich gebe auch recht, dass der Film reduziert ist. Jetzt bin ich in der Rolle, den Film verteidigen zu müssen. Ich gebe auch recht, dass er reduziert ist, aber ich denke halt so, es geht auch nur darum, einen Erzählstrang zu erzählen. Das schließt nicht aus, halt so, dass es natürlich noch, das steht nicht unbedingt im Widerspruch, glaube ich, weitere Geschichten zu erzählen oder nicht im Widerspruch zu anderen Narrationen. Ich würde auch tatsächlich widersprechen, dass es eine Darstellung ist, dass das quasi so ein Projekt der Eliten ist, die der Gesellschaft da was vorsetzen und sie quasi manipulieren. Ich habe den Film eher so wahrgenommen, dass es so eine Erzählung ist, dass es hier um ein Problem von Komplexitätsreduktion geht, das aber vielen gesellschaftlichen Akteuren eigen ist. Halt dass auch die Linke, wie gesagt, vor der Komplexität der Dinge kapituliert hat und die Politiker und die Unternehmen, die nun mal in der Machtasymmetrie, die bestehen in der Gesellschaft, nun mal eine spezielle Funktion einnehmen und dadurch halt besonders Macht repräsentieren, geraten dadurch meines Erachtens nur in einen speziellen Fokus. Aber ich habe das eher so gelesen, dass es irgendwie hier um ein gesellschaftliches Phänomen geht, das wie gesagt, verschiedenen Typen politischer Akteure eigen ist und eine Gemengelage erzeugt hat, an der sich viele beteiligt haben. Halt so. Ich denke auch die Neue Linke hat sich an einer Komplexitätsreduktion in den vergangenen Jahrzehnten beteiligt, ne? Mit vereinfachenden Konzepten. Man könnte auch plausibel sagen, so, dass selbst im Marxismus ja eigentlich schon eine Komplexitätsreduktion angelegt ist, auch wenn viele meinen, das wäre gerade ja so eine tiefgehende Analyse, aber gerade durch diesen ökonomistischen Bias, ne, das war auch ein Vorwurf vieler Linker zu Zeiten von Marx, dass das eigentlich eine sehr materialistische Verengung ist, halt so und Gesellschaft eigentlich viel komplexer und gesellschaftliche Macht viel komplexer zu erklären ist, was dann ja auch ein Schwenk dann im Neomarxismus ist, dass man sich auch dann eher halt auch Diskurstheorien zuwendet, poststrukturalistischen Ansätzen und dann dieser Komplexität doch auch mehr gerecht zu werden. Aber ja klar, ich meine, in der Politik gibt es immer ein berechtigtes Interesse, irgendwie auch so zu simplifizieren, zuzuspitzen. Man kann ja auch nicht irgendwie alles radikal dekonstruieren, ne? Dann steht man dann letztendlich auch irgendwie nur vor einem Haufen und weiß nicht so richtig damit anzufangen. Also man braucht ja schon noch irgendwie operable Kategorien, ne? Weil irgendwann kann man dann ja auch kein Zentrum mehr von Macht ausmachen, halt so, an dem sich überhaupt noch Widerstand dann reiben könnte. Also insofern gibt es, glaube ich, auch eine berechtigte Simplifizierung. Aber was wir dann ja heute erleben, ist dann ja halt gerade im Rechtspopulismus dann halt wirklich eine extreme Simplifizierung und Komplexitätsreduktion und mit der dann sich politisch unheimlich arbeiten lässt. Also man schaut sich jetzt zum Beispiel die Kampagne Erdogans in der Türkei an, halt so, da wird ja zugespitzt ohne Ende halt so, wer nicht für Ja ist halt so, der ist ein Terrorist halt so, also ja, kategorischer, so kann man eigentlich ja irgendwie die Komplexität schon gar nicht mehr ausschalten halt. So, ne? Ich hoffe, ich habe das einigermaßen beantwortet.
Okay, then I think it's time to switch to English and to ask Dányi Endre on the... Endre Dányi, sorry, my mistake. To say... Yeah, also nicht weit weg. To sit next to me. Sebastian Schindler and Endre Dányi decided to engage in a conversation about several questions raised by the film. And I think... Endre is a sociologist, media theorist, political scientist, communication scientist, and very much more, having studied in Budapest, London, Lancaster, and working at Frankfurt University for the time being. So, welcome the two of you, and I just hand over the microphone.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming and staying. It's a wonderful afternoon outside, I've been told, so I really appreciate that you're here. And also, the reason why this is in English is me. I feel much more comfortable speaking in English than in German, so Sebastian and I had this idea that this is going to be really an agora and an open, many-way conversation. So if you want to contribute, but you feel more comfortable saying something or asking something in German, that's fine. I will probably understand, and if not, I will ask. And again, if we say something that is too fast or too complicated, then just wave and ask and slow us down.
So we decided to start actually with a clip from the film. So you saw here a quick summary of the history of the 1980s, beginning with UFOs and ending with the end of the Cold War in this movie, in the depiction of Adam Curtis. And I think a lot of what is said has some initial plausibility. It's not like false or anything, but still Endre and I both, while watching this and other scenes, had a feeling of frustration somehow about how these stories are told actually in this movie. And we decided to talk about this frustration not only because this is just one movie and we wanted to be good film critics or anything, but we thought that there was a larger problem or symptom we wanted to speak about, with how certain stories about the world are actually told, with how more broadly we think about what happens out there in the world. And I actually wanted to start this conversation, which, as Endre said, you are welcome to jump in at any point, provided the moderator allows so, by speaking about what I found frustrating. And I don't know if any of that resonated with what you saw in this movie. And part of it is definitely the polemic. You saw at the end of this clip Jane Fonda and her then with the voice or the text under her, changing the world was too complicated, so she turns to but it's a polemic there, of course. It says the left has given up on trying to change the world. Instead, you focus on the body and do that. But it's an entirely negative attitude to what goes on there. It doesn't tell you that maybe something good happened as well when people started to think and care more about their bodies. That's not at all in. It's linked to a larger transformation, a very big story about the world. And of course, before the background of the end of the Cold War, what Jane Fonda does looks pretty naive. But only before that background, before that link to a very big story. So that was a first, cliche that I found problematic in the film. Then there's the sentence that the end of Cold War was not foreseen by anybody. Virtually no one, it says, all journalists, all politicians, no one saw the end of the Cold War coming. And that's true, of course. Many people were surprised by the end of the Cold War. And then, again, there's a subtext in there that we could have done a lot better. And when you think that through, then the subtext is of Adam Curtis that we should have known that the end of the Cold War was coming. And then when you start thinking about that, then the message is basically that, well, we shouldn't be surprised by anything that happens in history. We should, as journalists, politicians, and researchers, know precisely what the future brings. And I think that's, again, quite wrong, because if politics is really complex, as Adam Curtis reassures you all the time, then it's quite probable that surprises happen and that things are not foreseen. I think surprises are a big part of politics, and that's what changes all the time. So again, if you start thinking about these claims, they touch you on the surface, but when you reflect on them, I think they raise more questions than they have answers. Again, raising questions is not bad, but maybe let me say that more precisely. I think even Adam Curtis has answers that simply don't hold up. It's not true that not foreseeing such a big transformation simply means that everybody is naive. That's a part of history, right? And then there's the UFO story. And again, an interesting factual element. Like it's a fact, I assume, a fact that you can find at least online, Endre will say something about that, that the government was probably deciding to tell these stories to people. Oh, there's these lights, and probably it's an UFO, and he even has that one person telling that story, how he basically informed somebody else, told him that that's probably UFOs. It's not our weapons, right? And that's how this conspiracy theory spreads. But then again, it's a very simplified version about the government manipulating us, manipulating the people in a way. And that's basically what remains in the film. And the fact is not, the thing is not that message, that critique is wrong. There is manipulation, okay? But the question is, what's the alternative? If we have a movie that again and again tells you that story, then we feel reassured, but we won't ever have a possibility to access the world differently than through this simplified critique. And the problem is here definitely not false facts, right, in the film. The problem is really how facts are spoken about. Okay, perfect.
Loritz, you wanted to jump in?
Oh, yeah.
Just to jump in, I don't really... I find it problematic to interchange just the conspiracy theory that you have a government that is covering up aliens with a conspiracy theory about the government wanting you to believe in aliens just to cover up their weapons. So I'm true that's a dangerous way to tell a story, but I was interested in this Jane Fonda part because to me I thought about it like, don't get too caught up in your reflection about how your self-image is being seen, or how your self-image is how you see yourself, or how others see yourself, like we do as individuals when we are maybe working on our body, we are very concerned about how we might look. So we are so much thinking about just how we might look on the surface and how others might what the perception of the other is of us, that we don't really have a way to look at the other. So we always have to challenge our worldview and make sure we're not just believing that everything is going to stay like it has always been, and all we have got to do is make sure we get a good stance in it, and we have a good, nice position, and be looking cool while living in this world. because otherwise we might not be realizing that the world itself, while we are so concentrated on ourselves, is changing. So I didn't really find that message too problematic. While I have to admit that the way it was told is, if this was the message they wanted to propel, it might not have been the right way to tell this message. So I'm not quite sure whether this message which I took out of it is really what they wanted me to see. So that's another question. So, yeah.
Do you want to answer, or do you have, or should I?
You should say something.
Okay.
I guess I have something to say too, but I
Then
talk
say
so
it
long.
quickly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, on the first point, I think that's a very important point. Conspiracy theories are not all alike. Like, some are true and some are false, and exactly, some are more complex and some are very easy. And to believe that aliens are there in these lights, tell that story as an explanation, because conspiracy theories are very much about explanations, about explaining and reducing complexity. I think Holger left us with that statement here. Well, we need to reduce complexity somehow. We need to be able, perhaps, to make sense of what's going on, right? And so, of course, the point is about different ways of doing so. But then the question is whether this narrative that is replaced, or not replaced, that is told then that the American government spread stories about UFOs in order to protect its secret weapons program, whether Curtis, by telling the story, delivers up to the promise of his film to show us how complex the world is in reality. Because I think what he shows us, in particular in the way he narrates it, is that the world is actually pretty simple. It's the American government, very often, the government, that's the terms he uses, the government, the financial elites, the West, who does perception management, who is behind it. And I think that's actually not a story about how complex the world is. It's actually a story that tells us that the world is very easy and simple. And that's how the film works. And that's what makes me uncomfortable. Okay? That's where I think that it in the end, rather than showing us an alternative, and that's the very first words of the films, the elites have, in the past 30 years, since 1975, this year you saw before in New York, have told us a very easy, simple stories about the world that are false, right? In reality, the world is more complex than that, but that is replaced by another. Well, that is an easy story about the world. It's not really getting at complexity, and that's where I think the film makes one step, but you find yourself on the very same territory and on the very same land again, and it doubles. It merely doubles, as Adorno once said. This perception, and that's a harsh critique. I know that also, as Holger, he was very differentiated. I appreciate that a lot. Doesn't again apply to the whole film, to all these 2 hours and 45 minutes. But it's a pretty strong narrative that appears again and again, and where I think I would like to have an alternative way of telling stories about the world, rather than this simple story about manipulation again and again. And I think Endre thought a lot about that problem too, actually.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I think the story is a good key word. And just to relate to maybe the previous session, so we heard a talk about psychoanalysis, and the world of psychoanalysis assumes individuals, or is centered around individuals. Then there was a discussion or a presentation engaging with Marxist theories, and then you have economic forces at play, of course. I'm coming from science and technology studies, which is a subfield in the social sciences. And what we have there is primarily stories. So I think that this is the level at which I'm trying to engage with the film. And I would like to maybe return to one key sentence in the snippet that we just saw. Towards the end, there was one line that said, and this UFO story demonstrates that conspiracies were real. And I think it's a very interesting exercise to unpack this sentence. What does it mean that conspiracies are real? One way of understanding this is to say the explanation that that was presented is actually true. There was a certain appearance of reality, but actually reality was that. We were all manipulated by the US Air Force or the government or whoever happened to have the power to do such manipulation. But I would like to maybe experiment a different way of interpreting this sentence. And as I was watching the film, I was reminded of a cultural anthropologist's work. Her name is Susan Lepselter. She's based in Indiana, who did her, I think it was her PhD, was a long ethnographic research of Area 51, which is in the Nevada desert. It's next to a US air base that is supposed to hold the UFO secrets. And there's a tiny, tiny town next to Area 51 called Rachel. And so Susan Lepselter spent some time in Rachel, living with basically those who are in town. She was waiting at so she was doing waitressing job in a small bar called Little Alien, and alien spelled like in at the end, so it's the joke, not a very clever one. But anyway, her question was, how is it possible that otherwise completely sane and kind and very nice people buy into the weirdest conspiracies about UFOs? That they have absolutely no problem believing that the government and aliens have made a pact that in exchange for technology, aliens can steal the blood of people and experiment on cattle and whatnot. And so her suggestion was that instead of treating these people as all crazy, we could think about what kinds of traumas, what kinds of anxieties are manifested in these conspiracy theories simply as a result of having absolutely no power over the narrative of their own lives. And she does a very, very nice job in showing collective traumas associated with slavery, associated with the genocide of Native Americans, inscribed or projected into these stories. So for instance, some people were talking about aliens visiting this earth to colonize us. So kind of the memory, not personal, but collective memory of the colonization or the settlement in America was very much present in these narratives. So my suggestion would be that another way of understanding conspiracies are real is to take them as effects of very real conditions. And I think, in that sense, hypernormalization is such an effect. So on the one hand, so this was, it probably came up in the introduction, that the film was, it came out in October 2016, so just before the US election. And you know, I think part of its popularity is this mass hunger for explanations. What the hell is going on? What is going on in the West that we came to know after 1989, right? And to some extent, this is a film that is supposed to, well, at least not fill in the gaps, but at least address them, that they exist. And like Sebastian, my main sentiment was also frustration, partly because I was overwhelmed. So we talked a little bit about how the film engages in some reduction of complexity, but at the same time, it also does a relatively good job in reproducing that complexity, in the sense that I was watching the film and feeling, you know, that this is just too much. There's too much information. I don't even know where to begin to engage with it.
I don't know if there's any points. Otherwise, I'll just follow. Okay.
Soll ich auf Englisch sprechen? Ja, ne? Okay. Just because you were alluding to the fact that, well, there's the statement being made about nobody saw that the USSR was actually collapsing, and so it shouldn't have happened like this. I mean, if you would have checked things more adequately, then we wouldn't have been that surprised. I think this links back to the other films that he was making, that Holger was alluding to, The Power of Nightmares, where actually he is tracing the story of, of a narrative that supposedly serves to integrate the US society, which speaks about that there is actually a clear enemy and there is this opposition between good and evil, and he traces this back to the aspiration of the neoconservatives, and he claims actually that there was this narrative about the USSR being this eminent military threat, whereas they start inventing a logic where the impossibility to see the weapons becomes proof of the fact that these weapons exist. So to some extent, I mean, and he traces this, of course, to the to the then subsequent following up of the war on terror and things like that. So I mean, the point here is that there was actually a certain fraction within the government. So I think he's not treating it as a homogeneous block or black box. He's very often pointing to the fact that actually the intelligence agencies, which I found surprising, that the CIA and things like that, that they were delivering intelligence, saying, well, this is not the case. And the people who were trying to push that narrative, that easy narrative of this eminent threat of the Soviet Union, later on this eminent threat of the terrorist networks, the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and things like that, they were actually saying, well, we don't care about the intelligence that the secret services, the CIA and so on, are presenting to us. So I think, well, I mean, I'm speaking out in order to be defending the film in this case. I think it links to this broader narrative, and I don't think that it is so easy that he's saying there's always just this black box government. I think he's often trying to discern what kind of projects, what kind of actors, what kind of discourses, narratives are actually emerging and are also in conflict with each other. So he's speaking about this kind of internal conflict with the secret services, so or the intelligence services. So I think it is supposed to be understood against this background, that that he says there was this kind of narrative that willfully tried to portray the Soviet Union as an eminent threat, which maybe, I mean, the film suggests it never was like this.
There was another. You want Jacques to respond to that, or?
I'll say one quick word on that, because that's a very, very good good point as well, pointing out, and you're of course right, there is some value in the analysis as well in this film. Like, it's not, our argument is not that is all made up or something, but it has a specific form of view, of perception. It manages perception in a specific way too, to focus on such stories again and again. And the problem, that's precisely your question, is that the stories are probably better than some other stories, the either-or story in this case, right? That there are weapons in the Soviet Union. Here's a story about weapons in this film too, about the weapons in Iraq that never turn out, where there's also like little evidence taken that turns out to be evidence from a movie actually is taken to make this whole story about weapons in Iraq. But when I link that back to what Endre said about conspiracies and about the question, why do these people in the village need them? What's their, and that it hangs together with a feeling of lacking power, of not being master somehow, or not of Ohnmacht, of lacking power basically, then my concern, I think, is in a way, I don't know, is about emancipation of the viewers of this movie too. I think that's my concern with that, and with stories that allow you to see your own role somehow in the whole affair. And that's what makes me worried about movies that depict that as the whole reality, because then you are always out of them. Then you're always the object of some manipulation. And you never begin to tell a story where you are in. And of course that's a big, big problem, because how should one be in the story somehow, as these people in this American village want to be somehow? How can they, like, they can only tell stories about them being objects, be it of UFOs, of aliens, of the government. Only stories about them being objects. And then the question is, what kind of stories that are fact-based, that are not made up, can we actually have and be told that don't do that? And of course, that's a really tricky and complex question. And I think yeah. Sorry, that was long. Okay. Now, oh, that's the right person to speak now.
Yeah, maybe a comment before I address one of your last questions. I found it very interesting what different experience you had while watching the film, because when I watched the first hour, I had exactly the same experience as you. I found it too much simplistic, that it does not give an adequate view on those dynamics. But at the end of the movie, I had the same experience as you. I thought, wow, there's many lines of the narration. You cannot maybe make a whole picture out of it. And so at the end, I found it neither very good nor neither very bad or very bad. Yeah, I think the aim of the movie is not so much to show the complexity of the world, because with regard to complexity, I think a narrative movie can never represent complexity. You cannot tell complexity. Yeah, maybe social theories can come near to complexities, but you cannot tell complexities, because when you tell, you have a narrative, you have a start and an end, and you have a logic of time. Yeah, and you have a line in that, and a line is not very multidimensional. Yeah, I mean, there are possibilities, but not too much, I think. I think what's more the point of the movie is that you that you show different players in a bigger picture and their role, and I think Curtis is focusing on what he thinks are the dominant players, and I think I'm d'accord with that. Yeah, and as your question was, where is our place? Are we just objects? I think. And is the film only about that we're manipulated? And I think yeah, sometimes the movie has this tendency, but there are other parts of it where exactly the opposite is. At the beginning, he shows that the left is retreating in the 60s, and I think that's in a way right. And maybe he even gives too much power to the left movements in the 60s, yeah? Maybe they had not that power, but he thinks, okay, they're retreating, and it's giving more place to politics who are in a way apolitical because they leave the room to financial markets or whatever, yeah? And I think that's the part where you as a subject watching the movie comes in, because I mean, maybe you're not identifying with being a leftist or whatever, but that's the point where the question is, how can we come to change the world? And I think what the movie shows is not too much about agents who manipulate, but more about a cultural change. And that's also going to Fonda, that you're more concerned with yourself, yeah? You're more concerned with your body, whatever. This is, I mean, this is not the whole picture, but it's a strong tendency, and I think that's true. And I think this is a good point of the film.
Directly to the next question.
Just a short follow-up question, because I haven't seen the film. Is the narrator portrayed as somebody we can trust? Because only from the snippets I've seen, sometimes I felt like he's himself playing a conspiracy theorist, and thus marking the whole concept of us, the viewer, wanting easy answers. And so I don't know. Could somebody please say, or could you please, everyone who saw the film, discuss about whether we, as the audience, can take him seriously? Because that's an interesting question about the way this film is crafted, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, but I don't know if it's supposed to be the topic of your session in the next one, the aesthetics of it. But we were talking also about this, whether this play with the documentary format is ironic or not. But yeah, so I don't know if there's a definite answer.
Yeah. I think we can watch another clip and see, because I asked myself the same question, but my perspective from the, because then as well I wondered whether maybe he wants to create that feeling in me. That's the point of the movie, to make me a little angry, because it's then performative in a certain sense. It even performs itself what it criticizes, in a sense, what it alleges others do. It does itself what it says others do. And that's, of course, my main critique, which I think it's important to emphasize what Johanna said, that you have to then be very precise and decide what you look at. But I was struck by the opening lines of the film, which tell precisely the story about the big conspiracy, about the elites cooperating. But maybe we do move to the next snippet if we are not way over time by now.
Thanks. Okay, so in this part we will try to be more disciplined in both senses of the word. And let's just focus on Lord Anthony Giddens for the time being. So he was director of the LSE. When I started my studies as a sociologist, he was the living sociologist. His introduction to sociology was the textbook. And when I saw him sitting next to Gaddafi, and then later he also went and visited him in his tent, exchanging ideas about the third way and the third universal principle, I felt really, really sorry for him. Like, he got staged. And with him, I think a certain version of sociology and social theory. So I think it connects very nicely to your comment about complexity and social theory. Because to some extent, I think what hyper-normalization also shows is a certain kind of crisis of social theory or social analysis, which is being put on par with politicians' campaign speeches and mass media scandals. Like, yeah, well, you know, all these guys, they also have butter behind their ears. So when I was watching this film, this was the moment when I felt myself interpolated also as a sociologist. It's like, oh my goodness, can we say anything about the importance and the relevance of social analysis? Like, is it still possible to say what the specificity of our mode of storytelling is in contrast with, like, let's say, Curtis's film, which is a very masterful but also problematic juxtaposition of images and information. And so I think what we will do in this round very, very quickly is give two kinds of answers to this question, two disciplined answers. Mine comes from, inspired by French pragmatist thought and actor network theory, and suggests that if there is a difference between this mode of storytelling presented by hyper-normalization and the kind of storytelling that I find in a social analytical sense very productive, maybe it has something to do with the difference between how connections are being made rather than what is being connected. And so also one of the reasons why I wanted to tell you about Susan Lepseter's works is that I think that what she does is also demonstrates very nicely how to do connections carefully and how to place the reader or the viewer in a world where experiencing complexity doesn't necessarily mean feeling overwhelmed and helpless, but exactly offers the possibility of telling stories and telling stories differently in a located, responsible way. So this would be my disciplined answer, and Sebastian has another one.
Yeah, thanks, Endre. The role of social analysis or of social science in how we speak about reality today, about perception management, for instance. And what I wanted to bring in is basically a thought from Hannah Arendt, the reflection from Hannah Arendt about the role of truth and politics. She has an essay in which she reflects about truth and politics, and about the always difficult relationship between the two. At least in the history of ideas, where basically in the allegory of the cave from Plato, there's the philosopher who will find out the truth, but then returns into the cave and is confronted with hatred, basically, right? He is the one that isn't believed easily, even though he knows the truth, and that leads Plato to suggest a rule of a state of the philosophers, a kingdom where philosophers actually take over rule. And Arendt comments that there is a certain tyrannical tendency inherent always in this idea that those who know the truth, the philosophers, enter the political sphere, which is for her necessarily a sphere of plurality of opinions. And so the quest for truth, which for her is an important element of the human condition, becomes problematic once it enters the sphere of politics, actually. And her call is, of course, not that that truth has no role to play then in politics. Not at all. On the contrary, she is very concerned, in particular also about factual truth. Her argument is that we need factual truth about facts, because they serve precisely to establish the world, our common world, in which we then can act together and act
politically. And what I have been troubled very much is then we shouldn't try to think on the other hand that the facts that is enough, that putting the facts out there then will and respecting them will suffice to overcome the problems, the Trumps and populism in this world, of course. That would kind of be a little too easy because often populism even starts with certain kernels of truth, little facts that are there. I think what we should be concerned about is what is made out of them when these kernels are turned into this overarching story that explains everything. Then that becomes, as an ideology, a threat to the sphere of political action. And that, again, explains a little my worry about the factually correct story about Gaddafi that is told here, and the manipulation, the perception management, the management of the perception of Gaddafi, which is an important critique. And I don't, my argument is not that it's wrong what is that there, but if that is all we have to say about world politics today is the telling of such stories, then we are left in a somewhat uncomfortable and at least maybe quite comfortable but unsatisfactory position. Okay, so much. I don't know if that was very disciplined, but it was a comment. Thanks.
Is there any other ideas or comments on indiscipline or without? Because if there isn't, then it may be. Is there one?
Just about this, this distinction between truth and politics, I mean, I would agree with it, but I don't. I mean, I think this is an investigative journalist who tries to reveal certain connections in this world, which at least to me hadn't been known. And I mean, when I knew Anthony Giddens, of course, as well, when I saw him sitting there together with Colonel Gaddafi, I mean, well, I don't know, I didn't feel so much sorry for Giddens, but I was shocked to see something like this happening. And I thought this, well, to some extent, I mean, it shows, well, it's very strange, and it shows actually how strange the world in which we live to some extent is. And I mean, and trying to think this through, what this actually means, I think is quite something, quite food for thought for us. So I don't think that this is actually, I mean, it's well, I mean, again, I wouldn't say that an investigative journalist necessarily brings us the truth, but he might point us to certain connections which at least I wouldn't have seen otherwise. And I think, and I also think he doesn't bring us politics. I mean, this is not giving us a way how we could change the world, a way forward and things like this. I mean, this is what you criticize also. But I think this would be something that could actually only happen with a political movement who tries, first of all, to engage with the world. And if it is such a surrealist nightmare as it is depicted there, well, actually there is a lot of fact-checking and thinking through certain connections that we would need to do afterwards, after we were pointed to these kind of things. And once we understand it better, well, maybe we can organize and change something about it. But well, what I just wanted to say, I don't think it is necessarily to be expected from such a film that it is the truth that we should stick to, but it's rather, well, investigating certain connections and giving us food for thought. And I also don't think that it is yet the political movement we need. I mean, if anything, then probably the citizens of our societies would have to create that one by themselves. So, but yeah, I mean, just as a comment to defend the film again.
No, but I think actually that is also a good. Would you like to respond to that? I'm not responding. I'm just leading over to the next person. So.
Andrew gives me clear signs that we are done. No, then we take this as a comment. I mean, anyways, we had wanted to have many comments rather than questions on the ideas we present. So this is very welcome. Yeah, I think you're right that that we should take it as something. Maybe investigative journalism is though I expect investigative journalism also in other formats, and I think the question of the stories and what kind of political movement is there is always the question of the political movement is always also linked to the kind of stories we are then able to tell, and the question of this link I think should be problematized. Thank you. Thanks. I couldn't stop myself. Very undisciplined. Sorry.
I opened the door to that. Thank you both very much. And I think actually that the word film is something that should be taken into account now, because what we've seen, hypernormalization, it is a film and it works as a film and it works with filmic means. So I think we're leaving for a very short moment the level of political, sociological argumentation and switch over to a more aesthetic level.